Episode 1. The first bleed at midnight. They said she was the quiet one, the one who prayed long after the others had gone to sleep, the one whose candle never flickered, even when the wind howled through Santa Avelina's broken windows. But that night, at exactly midnight, something flickered inside her, and it didn't come from God. Sister Lucia had been kneeling in the chapel for over an hour, eyes closed, rosary wound so tightly in her hands, it left small white indentations on her skin. She wasn't whispering the Hail Mary anymore. She had gone still, unmoving, silent, as if waiting, and then she gasped, not from fear, from pain. Blood began to drip slowly, methodically from the center of her palms. Even though no wound was visible, it trickled onto the floor, forming a perfect circle around her knees. Sister Elena, the youngest novice, had returned to the chapel to retrieve her forgotten veil. When she saw Lucia bleeding, she rushed forward, frantic. "Lucia," she whispered, kneeling beside her. "You're hurt." But Lucia didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed. Her mouth was smiling, and then the blood began to move. Not splatter, not pull, move, as if drawn by a hidden hand. The blood slithered across the stone floor and curled into a strange shape, a symbol something no nun in the convent could recognize. But all of them would remember, because it wasn't holy. It was older than holy. By dawn, the convent was in an uproar. The Mother Superior summoned the town doctor, who found no injury, no puncture wound, no trauma of any kind, just perfectly smooth palms and a fresh symbol still stained into the stone beneath the chapel pews. When asked what happened, Lucia simply said, "He passed by." "Oh," they asked. She looked toward the crucifix, and for a moment, her eyes didn't reflect the light. Someone the prayers don't reach. That evening, they scrubbed the chapel floor. The blood wouldn't lift. Even bleach just when poured over it, like something alive still clung to the stone. The priest blessed the chapel again. He didn't notice, as he walked away, that his shoes left no footprints in the blood, but Lucia's did, because when she returned to the same spot at midnight, her hands began to bleed again. Not her palms this time, her throat. No scream, no cry, just a single drop of blood and a whisper. "He's closer tonight." Episode 2. The visitor in the chapel who wasn't there. The chapel was supposed to be locked at night, but on the second night after the bleeding began, the heavy oak doors creaked open at 12:03 a.m. On their own, inside, the candles were already lit. No one had lit them. No one claimed they even had matches. But there they stood, flickering nervously, as if the fire itself was afraid of what it saw. Sister Lucia entered alone. Again, no footsteps, no hesitation. She walked as if drawn forward by a rope no one else could see. Her bare feet pressed against the cold stone, and the floor did not greet her with chill, but with recognition. She knelt, folded her hands, closed her eyes, and waited. At 12:09 a.m., the security camera blinked on, a relic from modern times, installed reluctantly by the diocese after last year's break-in. The nuns hated it, but tonight, it watched. It recorded everything, and what it saw, no one wanted to believe. At 12:14 a.m., a figure appeared behind Sister Lucia. It wasn't there a moment before. One frame, nothing. Next frame, a tall shadow, robed in something too dark for fabric, face blurred by static, as if even the camera couldn't decide what it was seeing. The figure stood motionless, inches behind her. Lucia did not turn, but her shoulders tightened, and then her skin opened. Blood trickled from her collarbone, trailing down her chest like a red rosary. No scream, no flinch, just a quiet, resigned breath. "He came again," she whispered. In the morning, Sister Elena reviewed the tape and vomited, because frame by frame, second by second, the figure behind Lucia never moved until the exact moment her wound opened. Then, for 1 second, it lifted a hand, and in that frame, its fingers were longer than they should have been, jointed, wrong. The figure didn't touch her. It blessed her, backwards, with 3 fingers. Not one. The Mother Superior ordered the footage deleted, but the file wouldn't erase. Every attempt to wipe it resulted in the computer locking up and restarting in Latin. The cursor typed by itself. "Advenit iterum." He has a right. Again, that night, Lucia didn't go to the chapel, but the candles lit themselves anyway. and in the morning, a bloody handprint was found on the inside of the tabernacle door. Too high for any nun. 7 fingers, still warm. Episode 3, The Blood on the altar that spelled a name. It was Sister Magdalena who found it. She had entered the chapel at dawn to light the candles for morning prayers, but paused halfway down the aisle. The air smelled of copper and wax, but more than that, it felt watched. She raised her eyes to the altar and dropped the candle holder. Across the linen cloth, stretching from one end of the altar to the other, was a line of fresh blood, still wet, still glistening. It wasn't splattered. It had been written, a name, 6 letters, all in cursive. Soraya. The convent hadn't heard that name in decades. Soraya had been a postulant briefly. She entered the convent in 1972. By 1974, she was gone. The official record said she left the order. The truth whispered through the walls said something else, that she disappeared during Mass, that her bed was found soaked in blood, that the chapel doors had been chained shut ever since. Until Lucia arrived, they called the bishop. Again, this time, he sent a representative, a silent man in a gray collar, with eyes like polished stone and a scar just under his jaw as if someone had once tried to silence him with a blade and failed. He stood at the altar, staring at the name, Soraya. He repeated slowly, as if tasting something poisonous. She was the first one, he said at last, the first nun to bleed. That night, Sister Lucia bled again, not from her hands, not from her eyes, but from her back, long vertical streaks, as if something had dragged invisible claws down her spine. The blood soaked through her habit, staining the white sheets beneath her. Sister Elena tried to care for her, but Lucia only whispered, "He doesn't want me to carry your name. He wants me to finish it." "What do you mean?" Elena asked. Lucia's eyes opened. Slowly, she stopped the ritual. "I'm the one who must end it." In the chapel, the altar cloth was replaced, but in the morning, the blood had reappeared. Only this time, there were 2 names, Soraya, and underneath it, Lucia, written in the exact same hand, same blood, same thread, and between the names, carved into the wood beneath the cloth, a symbol, a circle with 7 points, 7 fingers, 7 wounds. Episode 4, The Priest Who Dreamed of Her Wounds. They sent Father Anselmo on a Friday. He was young, too young, barely past 30, barely scarred, still believed holy water worked on anything that growled, still believed scripture could hold back teeth. But when he stepped inside Santa Avelina, he said nothing, just paused and whispered, "It's colder here than outside." Even in July, he wasn't told everything, only that a nun had been bleeding inexplicably, only that she needed observation, only that evil might be near. They didn't tell him about the handprints, the name that rewrote itself in blood, or the eyes in the static, but that night, he found out anyway, because Father Anselmo dreamed of her. He saw Sister Lucia kneeling in the chapel. Her habit was gone. She wore nothing but bandages, wrapped tight like ancient linen, each strip soaked red except one, the one wrapped over her mouth. She didn't speak, she didn't move, but slowly, the bandages began to unravel on their own. Each one that fell revealed a new wound, not old, not scarred, fresh, open, alive, palms, thighs, spine, lips, tongue, and with every wound, a word echoed in his ears but never spoken aloud. He woke in sweat, blood on his sheets, not his blood. He didn't speak of the dream, not until the second night, when he dreamed again, but this time, Lucia was standing, and she spoke. "He has chosen me to bleed for what the church buried. He has chosen you to see it." Her eyes rolled back, and a hole tore itself open in the middle of her chest, blooming like a red rose. From within, a whisper, "You've worn his collar, now wear his wound." He awoke choking, found blood on his hands, not from a wound, but from his own rosary. Its beads had melted, carving a cross into his palm. The next morning, Lucia was sitting outside, staring at nothing. She turned to him before he spoke and said, "You saw me, in the dream? How do you know that?" he asked. She didn't answer, just looked at his hand, at the burn shaped like a crucifix, and smiled. "He's showing you the way," she whispered. "Now you just have to bleed for it." That night, Father Anselmo didn't sleep. but the dream still came, and this time, he wasn't watching. He was kneeling beside her, and the wounds were starting on his body now. Episode 5. The holy water that refused to touch her. They prepared a blessing, the kind reserved for dark things, ancient prayers, litanies whispered in Latin, and a chalice of holy water drawn at sunrise. Father Anselmo insisted. He hadn't bled in days, but the dreams hadn't stopped. Lucia said little now. She didn't need to. Her skin spoke for her, quiet streaks of red that surfaced whenever she entered the chapel. This time, they were ready. At dusk, Sister Lucia was seated at the front pew, still, pale, breathing slowly. She looked not like someone waiting to be cleansed, but like someone waiting for everyone else to realize it was too late. Father Anselmo stepped forward, lifted that chalice, and whispered, Aqua Benedicta, liberanos e malo. He flicked the water toward her. The droplets never touched her skin. They stopped mid-air, suspended for a breathless second, then began to boil. Steam hissed, a hiss that didn't fade. It grew, and with it came a scent the church had tried to forget. Sulfur, ash, and ancient rot. The chalice in his hand cracked. Hairline fractures sank through the metal like veins, and the water inside began to tremble and darken. Not red, not black. Clear water turned to ink. Lucia opened her eyes. He's beneath the well, she said calmly. What well? Anselmo asked, stepping back. She raised a shaking hand and pointed toward the confessional booth. The one sealed shut decades ago. The one they buried beneath it. The well they built this church on top of. That night, Sister Elena entered the chapel alone. The chalice had been placed on the altar again, but now it was full. She peered inside. Not water, teeth, human, infant, a down scene, stacked like rosary beads, and carved into the metal base, as if burned from within. This is not holy water. This is memory. Episode 6. The diary that bled ink. The convent had its secrets. Rooms that no longer had keys. Portraits with eyes painted just a little too wide. But its deepest secret wasn't in the chapel or beneath the floorboards. It was hidden in a drawer behind a wall in the old infirmary. Sister Elena found it by accident, or maybe by invitation. A draft had whispered through the cracked plaster as she prayed beside Lucia's bed. The candle went out, and when she looked up, the wall had shifted. Behind the loosened panel was a drawer wrapped in cobwebs, sealed with beads from a broken rosary and a strip of blood-stained linen. Inside, a small, leather-bound diary, black, brittle, and warm. She opened date, and immediately, the ink moved. Words bled through the paper like fresh wounds, as if the entries had been written on skin, not parchment. And at the top of the first page, property of Sister Soraya, 1973. Elena turned the pages slowly. The writing began normal enough. I hear him when I kneeled along, a voice that slithers behind the Latin. The Mother Superior says it's purification, but it burns. The blood came again last night. 3 drops, 1 for each lie I couldn't confess. Then, the entries grew darker. He does not hate the church. He hides in it. They think they locked the well, but he breathes through the walls. Lucia will come. She will finish the sentence. I couldn't. Elena frowned. See Lucia's name, written decades before she was born. She flipped to the final page. It was blank at first. Then, as if whispered into existence, a new line appeared in bleeding ink. Tonight, she will bleed a map. That night, Lucia convulsed during prayer. Her back arched. Blood seeped not from her wounds but from the spaces between her ribs, as though something inside her was pushing to the surface. They laid her down. Her skin split slow, controlled, as if guided by invisible hands, and on her back, lines formed, not random, not chaotic, a map. Sister Elena pulled out the diary. On the final page, more words appeared. Follow the blood. It leads to where they buried his tomb. At midnight, the chapel bell rang on its own. Once, twice, 3 times. And beneath the altar, the trapdoor they never knew existed, opened. Episode 7. The crucifix that screamed when she prayed. The chapel had never known silence like this. Even in storms, the rafters whispered. Even in mourning, the organ sighed. But tonight, after the trapdoor opened, everything held its breath. The sisters didn't speak of it. They avoided the altar, and no one dared to kneel, except Lucia. She returned at dusk, slower than usual, her skin pale and dry, as if her veins had emptied the night before. Sister Elena tried to stop her. "You need to rest," she pleaded, but Lucia only replied, "He's listening again, and the crucifix doesn't like it." At exactly 3:03 a.m., Lucia knelt beneath the great crucifix of Santa Avelina, the same crucifix that had hung above every Mass since 1842, the one said to be carved from the wood of a shipwrecked confessional, found adrift in waters where no church had ever stood. She closed her eyes, folded her hands, and whispered the first line of the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father." The air cracked, not like thunder, but like bone. The crucifix above her began to tremble, not shake, tremble, and turn. It screamed. A low, metallic shriek tore through the chapel, not from the wind, not from Lucia, but from the mouth of Christ. Would split at the lips, his eyes on say carved, shut opened, not with life, but with pain. Every sister in the dormitory woke up at once, clutching their ears as the sound pierced their skulls. Sister Joan vomited blood. Sister Mariana fainted, and would later wake up with burns shaped like thorns across her chest. Lucia stayed kneeling, unshaken. She continued praying. The scream grew louder, and then something worse happened. The crucifix began to bleed, not from the crown, not from the hands, but from the mouth. A thick, black stream, slower than blood, older than oil. It dripped down onto the altar, hissed on contact, and pulled at Lucia's knees. She whispered, "He's trying to speak, but the wood won't let him," and then she collapsed. When Father Anselmo arrived, the crucifix was silent again, but the scream still echoed in his ears. The altar cloth was soaked in black. Lucia was unconscious, her lips moving, but no words escaping. He looked up at the crucifix one last time, and carved above Christ's head where INRI used to do is a new inscription, still fresh, still smoking. INFERNUS. Hell is not outside. Episode 8. The exorcist who refused to touch her. They flew him in under false names and no cross. Father Corvin, the Vatican didn't announce his arrival. There was no red seal, no entourage, no blessing, only a suitcase lined with relics older than memory, and a face carved with so many scars that no one could tell which ones were human and which weren't. He entered Santa Avelina without a word, didn't bow, didn't kneel, just listened. Listened to the walls, listened to the silence, and when he heard nothing, he said, "She's not possessed, she's in conversation." They brought him to Lucia's room. She was awake, but her eyes were glazed like a glass stained from within. She didn't speak, but she was smiling. Father Corvin stood at the edge of her bed and opened his case. Inside, a vial of water drawn from beneath the Vatican crypts, a crucifix wrapped in the skin of a martyr, a host blackened by flame, and a prayer that, according to him, should never be said twice. He raised the host to her forehead. It turned to ash before it touched her. He dipped the fingers into the vial, but the water frowsy around his hand, and when he held the crucifix toward her chest, he dropped it, not from heat, but because it melted like wax, and screamed as it did, not in agony, but in mourning. Father Corvin stepped back. His hands were trembling. The room had grown colder, but only for him. Lucia looked up and spoke for the first time in hours. "You think you're here to cast him out, but he never entered me. He was born from me." The exorcist tried to recite the prayer. He got as far as the third line, then collapsed. When they found him, his mouth was bleeding, tongue blackened, and on the floor beside him, written in ashes from the melted crucifix, was a phrase, "Don't touch what bleeds in rhythm with hell." He left before sunrise, said nothing, wouldn't speak even when pressed. As the car pulled away, Sister Elena swore she saw him cross himself, but not with the sign of the cross. With 7 fingers, Lucia slept through the night, but on her arm, a new one appeared, not random. It was a word, soon. Episode 9. The bleeding map to the devil's tomb. It began on her skin, not with pain, not with screaming, just a slow, silent drip. At first, the sisters thought it was another wound, but this time, the blood didn't trail. It drew. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Sister Elena found Lucia lying on the chapel floor, her eyes open but rolled back, her habits soaked through with sweat and something darker. She knelt beside her, panicked until she saw it. Her back, blood was rising in thin, precise lines from beneath her shoulder blades. But it wasn't chaos. It was a pattern, a map. They stripped the fabric gently, revealing an impossible symmetry. Curving symbols, a central spiral, a jagged cross intersected by 7 points, each line pulsing like veins. Elena stared at it in horror. She had seen this before, not in dreams, not in books, in the forbidden archives of the Vatican. 3 years ago, she'd studied a parchment too fragile to touch, kept in a lead-lined drawer. It was called Cartum Diaboli, the Devil's Map, a guide carved by a heretic monk in 1491, who claimed he found the tomb where the devil sleeps, not in hell, but beneath the feet of those who believe in God. The map was declared false. The monk was burned alive, but before he died, he had written, "He sleeps beneath the well of the blessed, and he dreams through the blood of the pure." Now that same map was bleeding from Lucia's body, and worse, it wasn't finished, because with each breath she took, new symbols formed, as if her body were revealing it piece by piece, but only to those who had the faith to watch. Father Anselmo arrived moments later. He took one look at the markings and turned pale. "Is this Stigmata?" one of the sisters whispered. He shook his head. "No, this isn't the mark of Christ. This is the mark of a direction." They spent hours sketching it before the blood faded, and when they overlaid the drawing onto the blueprint of the convent, it pointed to a location beneath the chapel, just under the long-sealed confessional, where the well had once been, a place that had been covered up, bricked over, and erased from every record except one. Lucia woke only once that day. She turned to Elena and whispered, "He doesn't need to dig his way out. He only needed someone who bleeds the path back to him." And that night, beneath the altar, the stones began to shift, on their own, like something beneath them was finally listening. Episode 10. The child who drew her without eyes. That child never spoke, not a word, since the day he was left at Santa Avelina's gate. They found him wrapped in a blanket soaked with seawater and ash. A note pinned to his chest read only, "He sees through her now." They called him Matteo, 7 years old, mouth always closed, eyes that seemed too old for a child, too deep for innocence. And he drew, God, he drew pages and pages of strange, feverish sketches, nuns without faces, crosses with their beams inverted, Lucia standing in doorways that didn't exist. But the drawing that made them lock his notebook in the Mother Superior's office came on a Wednesday morning. When he handed it, wordless, to Sister Elena, it showed Lucia, but not the Lucia they knew. This version had no eyes, no mouth, just long, thin streaks of red running down her hands like rivers. And behind her stood a figure, black as burnt oil, with one arm inside her back, not stabbing, not harming, just inhabiting. A puppet, a shell. Elena tried to ask where he saw it, but he only pointed to the ground, not beneath the chapel beneath Lucia. He then drew a second picture, a well, open, filled not with water, but with teeth. And just above it, Lucia, bleeding from her feet, as though each step she took was being pulled downward. That night, Lucia fell into a trance. She stood in the hallway outside her cell, whispering verses that weren't in any Bible. Elena followed, heart pounding, and found Lucia pressing her forehead against the old wall behind the chapel, one that once sealed the well. Lucia turned. Her eyes were open, but her pupils were gone, only white, clouded, empty. And then she spoke in a child's voice, not hers, Matteo's. He's almost awake, and she's the only veil he still fits beneath. They locked Matteo's drawings in the archives, but the next morning, they were back in his hands, and a new page had been added. This time, the drawing was of the convent itself, split in half, smoke pouring from the chapel, a nun standing in fire, her arms stretched like a crucifix, and beneath her feet, 7 words, scrawled in blood-colored crayon. She bleeds the door he'll walk through. Matteo didn't sleep that night, neither did Lucia, and when they passed each other in the hallway at dawn, they bowed, like two mirrors nodding at the same reflection. Episode 11. The sister who tried to kill her and went blind. Not every nun at Santa Avelina believed Lucia was chosen. Some believed she was a door, and doors, Sister Benedicta said, were meant to be sealed or destroyed. She had served the convent for over 40 years. Iron-spined, rosary-knuckled, and loyal to tradition, she feared no demon, no priest, and certainly no child bleeding visions into stone. "This is no miracle," she muttered as she sharpened the blade. "This is a wound the devil keeps open." She waited until the fourth night after the boy's last drawing. Lucia had grown quiet again, sleeping less, praying longer. Benedicta entered her cell just before midnight, holding a kitchen knife wrapped in holy cloth, its blade dipped in sacramental wine and salt. The other nuns slept. The chapel was still. Only one candle burned outside Lucia's room. But as Sister Benedicta stepped over the threshold, it snuffed itself out. And, Lucia opened her eyes, already awake, already watching, already bleeding from the center of her chest, as if her body knew this moment was waiting. "You don't have to do this," Lucia whispered. Benedicta raised the knife. "You stopped being one of us the moment you let him inside." Lucia smiled, and her blood began to drift upward, not forwards, as if it were answering a silent call from the ceiling itself. The walls pulsed, the candle outside relit on its own, but now with a blue flame. Benedicta lunged forward, and then screamed. The knife bent in air, not broke, but as though caught in invisible fingers stronger than metal, and Sister Benedicta dropped it, clutching her face. My eyes, she collapsed, writhing on the ground. Her pupils turned white, then gray, then vanished. She wasn't bleeding, but she was blind, and in her blindness, she began to speak in a voice that wasn't hers. "She is not the vessel, she is the veil. You tried to pierce the curtain, but you only tore your side away." Lucia knelt beside her, took the fallen rosary from Benedicta's hand, and whispered gently, "You should not try to kill what bleeds in place of others." The next morning, Benedicta sat in silence, staring into a world she could no longer see. She didn't speak again, didn't eat, didn't blink, but on her inner wrist, something had drawn a symbol in her skin while she slept. A circle with 7 dots, the same symbol from the map, the same symbol carved into the wall above the old well. Lucia's wounds didn't open again for 3 days, but when they did, they formed words. One word, open. Episode 12. The room beneath. The chapel that wasn't on the blueprints. The chapel floor had always creaked. Old wood, sacred weight, time's breath beneath marble. But now it groaned, like something deeper than age was shifting below. And on the 12th night, the sound was no longer a warning. It was an invitation. They followed the map. Lucia bled. Sister Elena, Father Anselmo, and Matteo's silent child with eyes too old to belong to him. Lucia didn't come. She only said, "He won't stop you, but once you enter, you won't be able to stop him." The confessional had long been sealed, bricked up, boarded over, forgotten by official floor plans. But behind the paneling, they found it. A trapdoor, wooden, iron-rimmed, warm to the touch, etched with symbols no one could name except Matteo. He pointed at one and mouthed the word, breath. Father Anselmo hesitated, then turned the rusted handle. The door exhaled. They descended into darkness, lit only by candlelight and fear. The stairs were carved from stone slick with damp. The air smelled of iron, incense, and something that should have never been buried beneath prayers. And, they reached it. A room, not on any blueprint, not in any record. It pulsed. That was the only way to describe it. Stone walls, no windows, but the air moved in and out like a lung, as if the space itself was breathing. In the center of the room was a well, but not of water, of bones, down scenes, hundreds, infant skulls, finger bones, rosary beads woven into rib cages. Elena backed away, covering her mouth. Father Anselmo dropped to his knees, and Matteo stepped forward. He pulled a piece of charcoal from his pocket. Kneeling beside the well, he began to draw in silence. Circles, arcs, a symbol, the same one burned into Sister Benedicta's skin. And as he finished the final stroke, the bones began to tremble. From the mouth of the well, a single word rose, Lucia. But it wasn't a name, not the way it was spoken. It was a summons. And upstairs, In that chapel, Lucia stood from her bed. Blood poured from her feet as if answering a sound only her soul could hear. She smiled. He remembers the room now. She whispered, and he's thirsty. The candle in Father Anselmo's hand went out. In total darkness, something moved inside the well, a sound like wet cloth tearing, and turn, breathing, not theirs. Episode 13, The Letter from Hell Addressed to Her. It arrived just after the morning bell. No footsteps, no courier, just there, a single envelope, resting on the chapel altar, still warm as if it had been pulled from flame. Not paper, no stamp, no return address, just Lucia's name written in a deep red script across the front. But it wasn't ink. It smelled of iron and grief. Father Anselmo didn't want to open it, but Lucia insisted, her fingers trembling, not from fear but from something worse, recognition. She hadn't seen the letter before, but her body had already started bleeding from the palms the moment it appeared. The letter was meant for her, and she knew it always had been. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. The writing etched into it looked burned, not written. The words had been seared into the fibers, black and curling at the edges. The message was short. Your womb was never meant for birth. It was built to be a passage, what they call sin you were built to carry. When the seventh wound opens, the seal breaks, bleed, and do not stop. He's almost free. At the bottom, no signature, just a single symbol, a cross made of 7 drops, each drawn in real blood, and beneath that, a Latin phrase scorched deep enough to burn through the page. Sonis tua, tactum meum, your blood, my covenant. Elena screamed. Anselmo backed away from the letter as if it had hissed. And Lucia began to smile, but not with joy, with sorrow, with certainty. She turned to the others, her voice calm. Hello, I was never a nun, she said. I was a contract. That night, Lucia's wounds opened on their own, 7 of them, all at once. Palms, feet, side, spine, tongue, brow, woo. The bleeding didn't stop, even as she lay still, even as they tried to press holy cloth against her skin. And then, just before midnight, the letter burst into flames. No match, no spark. It simply caught fire in Anselmo's hands and left behind ash in the shape of a doorway. Under the chapel, in the secret room, the well began to boil. Bones cracked, whispers rose, and above it all, the words that no one said, but everyone heard. She bled the gate open. Now, we enter. Episode 14. The Mass with the Devil's Saturday in the front pew. They held the Mass anyway, as if the world hadn't already started unraveling beneath their feet, as if blood hadn't rewritten the walls, as if the devil hadn't just sent a letter with Lucia's name written in his hand. The pews were full. Sisters who hadn't taken communion in years now knelt like frightened children. Father Anselmo stood at the altar with hands trembling beneath his vestments, eyes darting to the corners of the chapel as if expecting something to crawl out of them. And Lucia, she Saturday in the back, wrapped in white, bleeding silently into the wood beneath her. They began the liturgy. Kyrie eleison, Christ eleison. Anton entered. No thunder, no fire, no dramatic wind, just a man, or something shaped like one, tall, pale, wearing a priest's collar that had never belonged to any church. His eyes black in the dark, but absent, a void dressed in flesh. He took the front pew, Saturday with his legs crossed, hands folded neatly, as if waiting for a performance only he had written. No one moved, no one breathed, even the statues seemed to flinch. Anselmo frowned mid-sentence. The candles began to weep wax down to the floor, and the crucifix above the altar crackened from age, but from something beneath it pulling upward. The mad thing looked at Lucia and smiled. Lucia stood. Her nose was bleeding now, and from her back, through her habit, 7 wounds reopened at once. Not bleeding, pouring, she walked forward, step by step, as her blood left a trail like a signature behind her. The figure in the front pew stood to meet her. They stood face to face at the altar. No one dared move, no one dared interrupt. And then he whispered it to her ear, but to her blood, "You were never the gate. Little lamb, you were the key." Lucia fell to her knees. Her eyes rolled back, and from her lips came a voice that wasn't hers. "Mass is over. Let the congregation descend." The floor cracked. Beneath every pew, The ground itself split open like a rotten mouth, revealing nothingness opposing. Endless dark. Sisters screamed. Some fainted. Others tried to run, but their feet sank into the stones like tar. And the man in the collar, he only turned, lifted his hand in a mock blessing, and spoke one word, tomorrow, and then he vanished. Smoke without fire, a presence unmade. The cracks sealed, the screams faded, but the air never felt whole again. Lucia lay collapsed before the altar, and on the white marble beside her, her blood had written a single sentence, slow, deliberate. The final silence will be inside the bell. Episode 15. The nun who bled, her last prayer. It happened just before the morning bell. The sisters had gathered in the chapel, pale and hollow-eyed, too afraid to speak the word amen. The cracks from the night before were near repaired without tools, sealed without mortar, but the silence remained, deeper now, heavier, as if the air itself was waiting for something to kneel. Sister Lucia had not moved since the Mass. She lay before the altar, lips sealed, her body still leaking threads of blood, thin now, quiet, like a candle burning its final inch. And then the bell above the chapel tolled. Once, but no one had pulled the rope, no one had touched it, and yet he rang, a single, flat, lifeless tone. The sound didn't echo, it sank, straight through the marble, straight through the sister's bones, straight into her. Lucia gasped, her eyes fluttered open at white, not black but red, every wound on her body open wide, not from pain, but like mouths, and from her lips came something no one expected, not a scream, not a prophecy, a prayer, but not in Latin, not in tongues, not for salvation. It was a prayer meant to close something. Father not of heaven, see what woken me. Let the gate forgive my blood. Let the bell toll for none. And Nesh smiled. The wind tore through the chapel. The candles exploded, not outward but inward, as if inhaled by something invisible. The walls bled, the floor hissed, and the crucifix turned upside down and cracked in two. Falling at Lucia's feet, she rose, even though her body had nothing left to give. She turned toward the sisters, who now knelt in terror, some weeping, others whispering prayers that no longer sounded right. Lucia's final words were soft, barely a breath. He cannot take what dies willingly. And Nesh bled one last time. Every pore, every wound, every inch of her gave way, until she was no longer standing, but floating in a pool of her own sacrifice. Her body crumbled, not burned, unmade, and where she fell, the blood formed a perfect circle, a seal, a lock. The next morning, the chapel bell was gone. The tower still stood, but the bell was no longer there. No one heard it fall. No one found it broken. It had simply vanished. Matteo stopped drawing. Sister Elena never dreamed again. And Father Anselmo left the priesthood, but kept Lucia's final prayer carved into his hand with a blade, just in case. In time, the world moved on, but under Santa Avelina stone foundation, the well still breathes, quiet, as lower, but not gone, because seals only hold when someone remembers what they cost, and blood only forgets until it's called again.